This episode of UK Low Carb Podcast is sponsored by Deliciously Guilt-Free. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to UK Low Carb. This is the podcast where we share individual stories to help build the low carb community, not just here in the UK, but also around the world. I'm your host, Dan Grief, and I think that change happens from grassroots movements for change, and that we are the change we want to see in the world. How can you be part of that change? We can join our Facebook group. You can share this podcast episode with somebody. Any way we can get the message out there about how hundreds and thousands of people are changing their health through keto, through low carb, and some really healthy change in their habits, which means they live longer and happier. Now, today's a particularly special show because I'm joined by a long-term friend who actually came on one of the very first episodes and really helped me out back then, and that is Cynthia Thurlow. So, Cynthia, welcome to UK Low Carb.
No, I've been looking forward to joining you again.
Fantastic. We spoke to each other, didn't we, in, was it November, our big conversation episode, or October? I can't remember now, where you were then sharing some information with our panel. That was quite good. I quite enjoyed that. Did you enjoy it?
I really enjoyed that. I think, part of like our intellectual growth is kind of being challenged. And certainly I was on with some heavyweights. And so it was really humbling to be part of that discussion. And I'm so grateful that you asked me to be incorporated with it.
Well, you know what? You say that, but I think you are a heavyweight as well, because you're a TED speaker who's a published author, and you have helped many, many people, particularly women, of course, but not just women, many of us on our journeys with regards to intermittent fasting. And, and I think, if anything, though, I really look at community as it's made up of different people who come at things from different angles. Mm-hmm. And so, we can learn from so much from different practitioners like yourselves and all the angles you have. So that big conversation, for instance, Amber Ahern was very much looking at it from like a human evolutionary point of view. You had Richard Morris looking from a sort of biochemistry point of view. You had Nina looking at the papers and the research generally and how that all fits together. You were looking at Ramadan and how people use fasting and the impact on that community. They're all very different angles, but we can all learn from every single one of them. There's no one angle has all the answers, I don't think. And I think that's where you came to that. But anyway, I'm getting carried away. Let's talk about what you're up to now then. So we agreed to this podcast before Christmas because I was really excited to hear you had a book coming out. So do you want to tell us a bit about your book and when is it released? I don't know if it's different in the States to Europe or is it around the same time?
No, so my understanding is it'll be available in the EU and the UK and Australia and a few other countries. I guess it's like each country has to say, yes, they want the book. And then it's available via platforms like Amazon and Barnes and Noble, etc. The book is really like a love offering. I feel like it's become a child that I've birthed, largely because over 20 plus years of working in the medical community, I couldn't fix a lot of what was going on. I could write prescriptions. I could set people up for surgeries. I could admit people to the hospital. But what I really ultimately wanted to be able to do is write literally a blueprint. And this book is specific for women, but really speaking to a strategy that can help us throughout our lifetime of eating less often. And so, I dive into some of the science. I talk about the hormones that make women very unique. And it's important for people to understand that men and women can both fast, but women have a very unique and beautiful physiology that's different in men. And so we have to honor our physiology and honor the fluctuations in hormones that go on throughout our monthly cycle. And then maybe as women transition into menopause, it's a little bit easier. But getting back to the book, it's really talking about the science behind fasting and really focuses on the strategy of a 16-8, which is 16 hours fasted with an 8-hour feeding window, really as being a goal and a starting point as on someone's fasting journey. And so we dive into what's unique in the peak fertility years, perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. There's a 45-day plan. There are recipes, over 50 recipes created by the amazing Beth Lipton, who leans carnivore-ish and low carb herself. So we were very, very aligned. But it really gives women an opportunity. And I think it's the first book of its kind that's solely focused on women and talking about fasting. And so I always remind men who reach out and just say, can men fast as well? I always say, yes, it's a little less complicated versus with women. There are a couple more variables we have to focus on in order for us to be successful. And so that's really kind of a short synopsis about what the book is about, but really it's a love offering. I feel like over, 20 plus years of having the honor of working with so many patients, it's something that people can feel like they have a piece of me working with them in their pocket, in their library, listening to in their ear, and be able to connect on a deeper level.
Now, on that point then, is there going to be an audio version of this? Will it be an audiobook as well?
Yes, I just finished recording the edits, and that whole
Oh.
process was very humbling.
Amazing.
I think that even for those of us who grew up with parents that were very specific about diction and the way that we speak, when you have a producer in your ear correcting you throughout the process, it's very humbling. So I feel like I walked away saying, I have greater respect and admiration for actors and people that do voiceovers, because it's far harder than I ever could have imagined.
The weird thing is, I imagine because you've written the text, it must be easier in some ways, but writing something is different to reading it, isn't it? And you might, when you're reading it, just describe it in a slightly more relaxed way or skip a few words, but you have to do it word perfect, do you? You have to literally read it word for word as it is for the person reading the book in person.
Yes. And we were still making, I was still making edits, because even though you take the time to write a manuscript and it gets edited multiple times by multiple people, you've looked at it 5,000 times, and then you start reading and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. I wouldn't say that. Yeah. And so we were still making edits as I was going along. But it was a really cool process. Certainly, I would say one of those kind of experiences that as an author, to really hear your book come to life is really cool. I think the challenge I had is I tend to be someone who thinks fast, walks fast, talks fast. And so I had the producer in my ear telling me to slow down all the time. And so by the end, I kind of got into the flow of slower speaking, but by nature, that's not who I am. And so it was like I had to fight a little bit of an internal battle to slow my cadence down.
Well, you know what? I take my hat off to you, because I think I'd find that very hard. I'm dyslexic as well, so writing a book would be hard in the first place. Then reading it back would be very difficult. So take my hat off to you, I really do. So I was going to just ask then, can we just break down some of the points and the themes in the book? Because I know you sent me a copy, and I think there's some things which would be good to just define. So in a 16/8, for instance, the 16, what are you talking about in terms of what is a fast?
Fasting is just a period of time where you're not consuming food. There are different variations of fasting. The type of fasting that I really advocate for, especially for newbies, is clean fasting, which means during your fasted state, the only thing you're consuming are, filtered water, bitter teas, bitter meaning it's not sweetened, or black coffee. And there are people outside of the fasting community that feel a little bit differently about what constitutes clean fasting versus dirty fasting. But I much like I tell my children, I really want you to learn the basics so that you can then decide for yourself later in your fasting journey what works best. So during a fasted state, you're staying hydrated. And if you consume some of the products I mentioned, bitter teas like green tea, black tea, and plain coffee, there are actual constituents of those beverages that actually have ingredients like polyphenols, et cetera, that can kind of boost fat oxidation, as well as, other kind of benefits to the body. And so I would say it's not just about hydration. It's so much more than that. And so during that fasted state, that's really what you're doing. And you're sleeping most of it. I think that's the common misnomer. People are like, oh my God, I can't go 16 hours. Well, probably 8 hours of that easily, you're probably asleep, or maybe 10 hours of that, depending on when you stop eating and when you go to bed. And so I think it's important for people to understand, you may not start at 16 hours, it may just be 12 hours that you're fasting, or I call that digestive rest. But ultimately, there are so many benefits. And, more traditional westernized societies, we've conditioned our patients to believe that we need to be eating snacks and mini meals and eating all day long. And I would argue that has contributed to the metabolic dysfunction and obesity and a lot of other health problems that we're seeing in escalating rates over the past 20 years. And so I think that having periods of the day that you designate as this is the time in which I eat and this is the time in which I do not eat can initially seem overwhelming, but over time it's very comforting, because you recognize, okay, this is the time frame in which I eat, and this is the time frame in which I do not eat, and it's one less thing to worry about. Like, I know years ago when I was still rounding on patients in the hospital, I mean, I would literally have, between how much I worked out, I would have, periods of time that I would stop to eat food. And I think about it now, like it's so much more efficient to know I'm going to have 2 meals a day versus mini meals and then bigger meals and then trying to figure out how to eat around exercise. And so now it's much more efficient. And I don't know about you, but I love efficiency.
No, I do. And I think you just, hit the nail on the head there for me as well. I was going to say the 16 hours for me, apart from sleep, well, I suppose it could be seen this way too, is probably the most productive of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, having the thought of not eating, not only does it mean that I'm not thinking about food preparation, cleaning stuff afterwards and all that stuff and digesting the food, but also it's the fact that I'm not even, my digestive system's at rest. There's nothing happening and I'm completely focused on what I'm doing. I'm not, like repeating a little bit or whatever. Nothing like that's happening. It's just completely clear. The other thing I was going to ask is, and this is where I'm going to bring my own story into this a little bit. So I try to fast. Well, I don't say I try to. I'm just so busy. I don't have time to eat sometimes. But I'm not a breakfast person anyway. And actually on Saturdays, I have breakfast only because it's my kids and us together and it's a nice social thing. But I must admit, 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, that's a bit heavy on my stomach. And it's like, I'm not used to it, that's for sure. But the 16 hours part, I still have a little bit of cream in tea. And I kind of appreciate from the reason I was asking that question before, because that's not really clean fasting, is it? Clean fasting would be a black tea, which I can't stand, but maybe I should try a herbal tea. Sorry, herbal for you Americans. Or maybe you don't like the H for some reason, it's offensive. So herbal tea or maybe like a green tea instead would just be a better option, wouldn't it?
Well, I think it always goes back to like what's happening in the body when we consume dairy. We know it's insulinemic. And so we're trying to keep our insulin levels low. And I do have people that will say like, I really love cream in my coffee, milk in my coffee. And I'm like, well, just have it at the end of your fasting window or have it in your feeding window. Some tricks that I found that have been super helpful if people don't like the bitterness of plain coffee is to add either salt. So like Redmond, like high quality salt can change the flavor profile enough where it's not so bitter. Or you can add cinnamon, which we know helps boost insulin sensitivity. So those are 2 ways around it. I generally have found that if someone's really a diehard, they love coffee, those are 2 things you can do. And I think what I would say more than anything is we want variety in our diet. So, trying different types of teas is certainly important. And whether it's herbal or herbal, it's fine. I usually just say herbal, but the point of why I think it's important just to try different things is our body likes variety. And, for the same point, once you've been successful at being successfully fat adapted, you've been fasting for a while, I always say you want to vary your fasting windows, just like we don't do the same type of exercise every day. We don't eat the same foods every day. I always say monogamy is good, but like we don't want to be doing in terms of lifestyle changes. We want to make sure we're changing things up because that makes our bodies fundamentally a little bit more resilient and stronger.
That's interesting. So it's a bit like when they say at the gym, you should never do the same routine all the time, but the change in the exercise, the drill makes your body have a bit of a jolt and a shock, which then helps it to progress more than it would if it was stuck in the same patterns. I never considered that in terms of food and fasting. That's really interesting. Wow.
Yeah. And I think, much to your point about if people are lifting in the gym, you want progressive overload. So each time you go to the gym, you may do a similar exercise, but you want to be making sure that you are adding more weight, you're doing more reps, and you're doing something that forces your body to, because our bodies, quite honestly, they like being comfortable. And so we have to move outside our comfort zone to add a little bit of hormetic stress. And that's what fasting is an example of. Hormetic stressors in the right amount at the right time actually make us stronger as human beings. And so I think it's important for people to understand, like, even though I've been fasting for 6 years, I'm always changing things up. And I find that most of my, patients and clients, when I encourage them to do the same, they actually feel like they enjoy the challenge of things not consistently always being the same.
So if that's the case, say for instance, we've got the 16-8 sort of pattern there, and say for instance, my maths isn't the best, so let's just try and work this out. Say for instance, you go to bed, you get up in the morning, you're not eating until maybe like 2 in the afternoon. I kind of think, and I'd love to talk to you about the circadian rhythm stuff, because I know we spoke about this before. If I'm eating later at night, I definitely feel there's more of an impact on my health. And that's one of the things I've realized recently. Somebody trolled me on YouTube and was quite abusive, actually.
Oh,
And yeah, they said, I'm not a good example for the low carb community. I'm obese. And basically was I thinking being online, it looks like. And I was like, hang on a minute, like we're all just trying to work these things out. And I think one of the things that I realized from that was, hang on a minute, I might be doing sort of 16-8, but if I'm eating really like 10 o'clock at night and then going to bed at 2 in the morning, which is what I was doing because I'm trying to run a business and a family and a wife with a PhD and all the rest of it, then it's going to be, obviously, even if I'm eating the same amount of calories and the same kind of food as somebody else, if my 16-8 is completely off whack with regards to my circadian rhythm, then that's going to have a nasty effect on my health generally. And my sleep was less than most people. It's about 6 hours or less a night. And I've kind of been working on that as well to increase my amount of time of sleep and then sort of make sure I set my alarm for 10:30. So by 10:30, I'm in bed, whatever happens, if I'm tired or not. And I don't eat anything now after kind of 6:30 in the evening. I've only been doing this for like 4 days, Cynthia. So, I'm not going to try and pretend I've got a massive result yet, but I'm going to follow this groove and see where it takes me. But surely there's a difference, isn't there, between the 16-8 I was doing before, where I was actually pretty consistently low carb. And I know you're not talking about what's actually in the food necessarily, but I was pretty consistent, I think, healthy eating. But I think it was the time of day was really bad for my hormones and everything. Can you explain what was happening when I was doing the sort of shifted to later at night eating to when I was eating earlier?
well, I mean, just looking at our physiology, I generally recommend that people eat when it's light out and don't eat when it's dark out. Now, I recognize
Oh,
it's winter
interesting.
time, and that may
Yeah.
not be feasible for a lot of people, especially for shift workers or people that have unusual work schedules.
Yeah.
But understanding that we become more insulin resistant as the day goes on, and certainly there are portions of a woman's menstrual cycle where she's more insulin resistant, usually after ovulation, closer to menstruation. But I think even for you, Dan, when we eat so close to bedtime, it's really not giving our body the opportunity we're generally less physically active. So less opportunity to help bring insulin levels down. Like I remind people, even taking a 10-minute walk after dinner can be hugely impactful for bringing our blood sugar down and lowering insulin levels. And so I actually do recommend that. With that being said, I think that melatonin is one of these key hormones that helps aid with sleep in the body. I'm oversimplifying it, but melatonin is there are actually melatonin clocks throughout our body. So when we're talking about chronobiology, when we're talking about following this natural rhythm of the body, cortisol, melatonin, as well as other hormones, we're more apt to be more hormonally cognizant, aligned with our circadian rhythm if we are eating. And I'm not saying eating at 8 a.m. I'm saying, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, you're going to be able to honor those unique rhythms better than if you're eating, you're opening up your feeding window and eating a ton of food in the evening when you're less physically active. We know we're more insulin resistant as the day goes on. And I think that I find a lot of people, now I normally have an Oura ring on, mine's charging right now, but an Oura ring is a device that you can wear that tracks heart rate variability, it tracks your sleep quality. And I know for myself personally, as well as a lot of my patients, that they recognize if they eat within 2 to 3 hours of bed, what that does to their sleep quality, what it does to their heart rate variability, what it does to their deep sleep, their REM sleep. Because if your body's focused on digesting food, it's not able to be as physiologically balanced in terms of what goes on in sleep. And I think many people don't realize that there's this whole waste and recycling process that goes on in the brain at night because it requires so much brain effort. It's called the glymphatic system. This is when our brain is actually getting rid of plaques and debris that our body no longer needs. But it requires so much effort in terms of brain energy that we really only can do that during bedtime. And I remind people that, after about 10 o'clock at night, it's stressful to our adrenal glands. Our adrenal glands are designed to be an emergency backup system. We're in a hedonistic, sympathetic driven, dominant society. Most westernized societies are. And so you just start to think about the downstream impact of what happens if we're not in bed earlier. And so even though you're only 4 days in, I would say bravo for making those changes, but we lose out on peaks of growth hormone that occur around 1 a.m. And so if we're not asleep our body isn't going to be able to do that. And growth hormone is certainly important for a lot of reasons. You start to think about the downstream net impact. We know that if you're not getting enough sleep, it impacts leptin and ghrelin and blood sugar stability. And so all of these factors, and the joke I usually say is, if I can't get you to sleep properly or through the night, I can't get you to lose weight. So I think we need to embrace sleep as best we can. I recognize, running businesses and having little people, just wait till you have teenagers, they'll go to bed later than you. I think it's all about balance. And so I think we have to honor our own physiology, and we have to honor what's going on in our personal lives. But the recognition that, based on all the research that I've been reviewing and looking at over the last several years, eating earlier in the day is going to be better for you physiologically than waiting until later in the evening. I know anytime I eat, and my kids now make fun of me, but anytime I eat after 7 o'clock at night, it destroys my HRV, my heart rate variability, which shows this balance between the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. We want a balance. It's not one is bad and one is good. It, definitely disrupts my blood sugar control, and I wear a continuous glucose monitor. And so I'm being an avid data collector. I like data. And I think it's important for people just to understand that there are downstream effects of choices that we make, but we do have control. And so trying to honor what's going on in our personal lives and trying to do what's most aligned with what makes the most sense. And certainly, I think for you, it'll be interesting to see in a couple more weeks how you feel getting in bed a little bit earlier. And it probably feels strange.
Yeah, it really does. And the thing I've noticed firstly is that I was so used to, doing all the things I do in my life. I was kind of used to thinking I'm an infinite resource and that I can just cram more and more stuff in. And I turned 40 a year ago, and I'm like, you know what? It's about that age where you have to start thinking about, this can't go on forever like this. I'm not like 18 to 20, 30-year-old sort of person. And so I thought, you know what? I better be sensible. And I realized now, even though I think my food's pretty good, I'm not losing weight because of that stress I'm putting on myself with the sleep. I'm convinced about it. I think, what you just said is exactly my situation. My blood control is all over the place. I'm not collecting data on myself, but I'm sure that's what's happening.
Yeah.
But the weird thing is, the last 4 days of doing this, I'm going to look back on this episode in a year's time and see where I am. But I feel way more tired in the day, and I'm feeling better for it in many ways. But I think I've been wired with high adrenaline probably for years, and that's really bad for you, isn't it? The cortisol levels being up and the adrenaline levels being up is not a long-term sustainable thing, is it? And I think now my body's probably starting to calm itself down, and it's we're tired. That's my layperson's view of that. Is that what's happening?
Well, I mean, it definitely could be. And so cortisol gets a bad rap, just like insulin gets a bad rap. But I remind people, there are people who just are more sympathetic dominant. The type A's, the ones who want to get their to-do list done. I struggle with that every day. But much to your point about having a big birthday, I had a big birthday in August, and I kept saying, I just need to go to bed earlier. It's kind of embarrassing if I tell the world how early I go to bed, but my body is so much happier. And so, last night my husband was laughing. By the time he finished with carpool and got home at 9 o'clock, I was in bed. I was like, I have a busy day tomorrow. I'm just getting to bed.
I think going to say we go to bed at the same time, but there's a 4-hour time difference.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, much to your point, when cortisol is up, if our body perceives we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, we're in the sympathetic mode. There are a lot of things. You're not going to digest your food as well. You're not going to be able to stop and have a bowel movement. You're not going to stop to have sex. I mean, you just start to think physiologically your body is prioritizing specific needs, like shunting blood to muscle so you can run, making you very alert. But you're right, over time, cortisol being up and not being properly balanced with another hormone called DHEA as well as others can be hugely problematic, because when cortisol's up, it means your blood sugar's up. It means your insulin levels are up. And so I remind people that if we're in this chronic, harried, stressed out mode all the time and cortisol's up, I mean, its job is to make us more alert, but it can burn us out over time. And so I would not be at all surprised if you go through a period of time where you're going to have to rest more and your body's communicating. And so I think kind of leaning into the intuition of our bodies and honoring our bodies, because I know for myself, being in a bit of an adrenaline junkie, I worked in the ER, I was, worked in cardiology, dealt with the sickest people. And then I just got to a point and I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't feel like I have to put my health at such extremes in order to be stimulated. How can we do this in other ways? And so I always encourage people that I'm working with to do things that seem kind of simplistic, but are critically important. Like, as an example, when you get up in the morning, get sunlight exposure on your retinas, because that will help drive down your melatonin and increase cortisol. And it kind of reminds your body. And it's good for us to get connected with nature, even if it's you take a 5 or 10 minute walk with your kids. Maybe, I don't know how old they are, but maybe you're walking to the school bus, or you're taking them to school, or you're walking them to school. Really getting that exposure on your retinas is certainly super helpful. And so it's honoring your body with little things every day that don't necessarily cost anything, but we know have huge net impact on helping to balance the biorhythms and the circadian rhythms in a way that benefits us, as opposed to forcing our bodies. Like, I know in my 20s and 30s, that's definitely what I did. I, didn't get enough sleep, probably too much intense exercise, probably wasn't eating the right nutrition. And so I think it's important for people to understand, like, we can change course, we can change what we're doing. It's always challenging, but it doesn't mean that over time, like for you, you're 4 days into changing when you go to bed. I bet in a couple more weeks, it won't be such a big deal. But right now you have to think about it. It becomes, the way that you kind of create a habit is you set that intention and you put plans into action.
Do you know what it is? It's basically, okay, my kids are 3 and 6. So I basically treat myself like I treat them. And I'm like, okay, I know that I have to make sure my children's food is good for them. I have to make sure they're getting the right sort of exercise and exposure to going outside playing, not just being stuck indoors on screen. I have to make sure they go to bed on time, that their hygiene is to the right standard. And I was like, it's really funny how I parent my children, I think, pretty well. But I didn't really parent myself very well. And I thought, okay, so I've got an alarm now for 10:30 at night and another alarm for the morning. And I just thought, if I'm not tired, I'm going to go to bed at 10:30 anyway and just make it happen. And like you say, I think it will become a habit. And we are our habits, aren't we? I think, for good and bad, we are the product of what habits we follow in our lives. It's not a one-off. It has to be a consistent thing to make a difference for good and bad. People have bad habits like smoking or something. Of course, you see they go the other direction. That's just how we work, I think.
Well, and I think it's also important, like the habits that we're teaching our children translate into the habits that we kind of embrace ourselves. And so I'm sure your 3 and 6-year-old, there are certain cues visually that they know it's time to like calm down and get ready for bed, whether it's reading a book or they take a bath or you use essential oils or whatever. And I encourage adults to do the same thing. Like, I wear blue blockers as soon as it gets dusk. And there are specific things that my body knows. Okay, this is how, the lights get dimmed. And there are certain things that I will do in the house that kind of condition my body. And the one thing that's kind of interesting in terms of like our physiology, both for men and women, we produce less melatonin as we get older. And so melatonin is this master antioxidant. It's not just a sleep hormone. Like, people think of it just as like it's in a bucket. And I'm like, no, there's so much more to it. And I've come to find out that, it's important for us to understand there are other things we can do beyond, supplementing with melatonin as one example, but just being really specific and intentional about the quality of your sleep, which is why I love the Oura Ring, which I have no affiliation with them. I'm not plugging it because I get a kickback. But I think it's important, like for me, being able to see what does my REM and deep sleep look like, and what do I need to do differently the next day? So I always tell people, think about your sleep in the morning. Like, you want to set it as an intention. What am I going to do today to ensure I have a good night of sleep? And that, like, flipping that perspective, instead of thinking like, oh God, it's 8 o'clock at night, I got to start thinking about sleep. The right way to think about it is when you get up in the morning, kind of set that intention. Like, what are the things I need to do today to make sure I have a really good night of sleep?
Wow. Could I just ask then? So I know we will come back to fasting in a minute, but in that, because sounds like a good investment for me. So in terms of the Oura Ring, what are you looking for a good night's sleep with regards to REM and the other types of sleep that I don't know the name of? What is it you're looking for there, Cynthia?
Ideally, it's a balance, because some types of sleep are really important for brain health. Some types of sleep are really good for recovery. And so it's all about balance. Everything about the body is balance. And I can tell you, when I get less than 7 hours a night of sleep, I know I'm going to take a hit on my REM and I'm going to take a hit on my deep sleep. And we need those. And especially now that, we're kind of crossing over this middle age I know sometimes people take offense when I say that, but like we're no longer in our 20s and 30s. So we have to take
Very diplomatic.
a greater priority. But no, so the different types of sleep, we have to have non-REM sleep. We need REM sleep.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that, as I mentioned earlier, this whole process of waste and recycling and why it's so critically important and why we get this synthesis of all these different types of hormones and repair that goes on while we're asleep. So I think for me, obviously I knew the benefits of sleep before I got the Aura, but it just allows me to track it. Like, okay, here's this is the amount of time you were in REM sleep. This is the percentage. This is the time you're in deep sleep. This is percentage. But the Aura also gives you like a readiness score. It gives you a sleep score. The irony is, I suspect I had COVID in December, and I was able to literally 2 days preceding getting sick, my temperature went up by like 0.2%. I mean, it's a very small.
Really, that tiny. Wow.
My heart rate went up, my resting heart rate, which is normally in the 50s. And so it was like I could trend all this data and then the disruption in the sleep. And it's fascinating to me. But I'll admit, like, I'm a data geek. Like, I like information that I can correlate. And I recognize not everyone wants to be that kind of quantified, but I do. It's just, for me, it's like very validating. So I think on a lot of levels, like searching and making greater efforts at deep replenishing sleep, like that's the sleep when you wake up in the morning and you're like, I feel refreshed, like kind of having that check-in with yourself. Like, do you wake up feeling like you're struggling to get out of bed? Or do you wake up saying, okay, I had a good amount of sleep, I can kind of go about my day? And just drawing the correlations with when you have a bad night of sleep, what do you crave to eat? It's probably not the healthy food. It's probably not broccoli.
Yeah.
You're probably going to be leaning towards those carbs. And I think that it's not the good carbs. It's the processed carbs that all of us try to limit.
Seed oil fried carbs. Yeah.
Seed oils. That's a whole bucket of
of chicken. But so in that case, I just want to talk about the 8 hours now, if I may, from the other half, because you could do this very differently as well. Like in theory 16-8 can be like taken on board by a lot of people, but I heard you say earlier on you recommend 2 meals in that time, and I just want to say that the snack culture in the UK is the same as America. I were at a group event the other day with my family, and they said, "Oh, make sure you bring a snack for your children." And I remember I was like, "My children have never snacked because they eat They eat 3 meals a day, but they eat proper food, and they're never hungry between meals. So why are your children not having meals and snacking all day, or why are they just filling their face with junk and not actually eating the proper food?" So that time you said 2 meals. I'd like you to just expand on that if you can. And there's nothing between those meals, is there?
No. And let me be clear. I mean, I do have patients that are younger and need 3 meals a day, but generally speaking, I say 2 just to keep it simple. And I'm also a proponent of understanding the physiology in the body and understanding that your body needs like 3 to 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours in between meals so that it can properly detoxify, break down, and move food along in the gut. And there's something called the migrating motor complex, but I won't nerd out on that. But it's a really important mechanism in the gut. And so if you're eating frequently, then that can't actually do its job. And that's really important. So I always encourage people to be very protein focused. I think most, if not all, adults don't eat enough protein. And protein is, not only is it critically important for satiety, but it's also important to build and maintain muscle. And I think that if you ask the average American here, especially women, they don't eat enough protein. So that's what keeps you, like, will keep that satiety, kind of get the leptin and ghrelin like in check, so you can push your plate away and say, I feel satisfied. And then, every meal should be protein focused with some non-starchy vegetables. I am a proponent of healthy fats. I think it's really bio-individual. So you may be able to eat a ribeye, but a ribeye might be too fatty for me. Maybe I eat filet, but maybe I then decide I need to have a little bit of avocado or some nuts, which is a whole separate topic because they're delicious and easy to overeat them. But maybe it's butter on some vegetables, or maybe I, have some MCT oil that I had as a part of a dressing on a salad. So there's all different ways to kind of structure your macros. But I remind people, you never want to break a fast with just carbs. That's important. You can break a fast with bone broth. You can break a fast with protein. You can do it with a light meal, but you never want to just have a bowl of oatmeal or, a bowl of pasta or anything like that. I mean, that's going to just set off this deluge of hormonal cascade, and then your appetite's going to not be where it should be. So really both those two meals, animal-based protein is generally where I kind of am very aligned, non-starchy vegetables, healthy fats, if you don't already have them incorporated in that piece of salmon or the ribeye, etc. And then, you really shouldn't be hungry in between meals. Like you mentioned, your children, you don't have to bring snacks for them because they eat a proper meal. Same thing with adults. I say, if you get hungry in between a meal, it means you didn't put your meals together properly. And so that's when I go back to the protein piece. If you eat enough protein, you're going to be very full. You'll be very satiated. Your blood sugar will be stable. You're not going to be craving junk afterwards. And so I think first and foremost, it's the no snacking piece. I always say you're a grown ass adult. No one should be snacking. That's my standard snarky response. And then number two, making sure you have protein focused meals. And for a lot of people, if they're not eating enough protein, that could be instead of, and I know we have our metric system and our kind of antiquated use of portions, but push the protein lever. Like if you have 6 ounces of salmon, push it to 8. It's really important for us to acknowledge that more protein is generally going to be better for us than less. And then sometimes people say, well, I'm not hungry for a third meal. How can I hit my protein macros? And so I'm very aligned with a physician here in the United States, Dr. Gabrielle Line, who talks about muscle as the organ of longevity. And one of the ways to really facilitate building muscle, maintaining muscle, et cetera, is eating protein and lifting heavy things and getting high quality sleep. But I always encourage people, like maybe you have bone broth. Maybe you haven't hit your protein macros. Maybe you have some bone broth. Maybe you have a high quality protein shake. And we can talk about how to look for what is high quality and what is not. I always say limited ingredients and being really careful about where it's sourced from. But I'm a realist and I acknowledge that even I myself, some days it might be I have a protein shake because I'm literally back to back with work and I don't have time to sit down, but I will make time for that proper meal. And so if you follow those kind of rules, if you will, you're going to have greater success. But here's the other thing. Healthy fats are good. Healthy fats are calorically dense, although I don't count calories. I don't encourage people to do that. I do encourage them to count their macros if they're trying to get a sense for where they need to be. Healthy fats are easy to overeat. Think about guacamole, think about avocado, think about nuts, think about cheese.
Totally agree.
So sometimes you have to, I always say, if you can't moderate, you'll eliminate. But if you can moderate, then you have to measure. And I find like that really is helpful for people to understand. Like I love salted macadamia nuts. I will measure out a portion and I put them away because they're too easy to overeat if I'm just sitting eating them out of the bag. Yeah. I'm not aware of how much I've eaten.
And the salt on them as well. It just
totally.
Your brain loves that, doesn't it? Because of course it needs electrolytes, and so it'll just keep going. I think I've learned that the hard way, actually. That I love fatty cuts of steak and everything, and I've just thought I think what you just said there is spot on about the protein focus first, and that's what Ted Naiman said when he came on, of course, because that's very much his focus, isn't it? And I think there's a lot there for me. I think that I don't know if it works for everyone, but in my own instance, I have seen that work for me. That if you fill yourself up on good protein, then actually you're kind of set for the day. I mean, to the point of you really just do not want food, whereas you can actually be really full on carbs and then about an hour later, well, we see this happen all the time, don't we? People go to restaurants, they fill up on carbohydrate rich meals and then they have their dessert afterwards when they're full because they can always find a bit of space for more. But if you're really filled up with protein, you can't face anything. You're absolutely like, that's me done. And actually today I'm going to have lunch in a moment and I've got some beef shin sort of slow cooked last night with some broth and it's just going to be, I can't wait. I'm getting excited about it. But
anyway. I can see your mouth watering right here.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So if those are listening, I got away with it, but Anyway, so on that then, can we just talk about protein? Because I agree with you. The source of the protein is a really important point, isn't it? And this is what worries me a little bit. So, I was looking at someone's meal the other day who's a vegan, and I just thought, my God, there's virtually no protein on your plate at all. Now, I'm not saying veganism is necessarily bad per se. You can get protein, but can we talk about the types of protein and what's better and should we say what's optimal and what's less or suboptimal in terms of where you get your protein from?
Well, I think that's a great question. Obviously, I'm always respectful of people's choices that they make. However, we know animal-based protein is going to be superior to any plant-based protein. That's not to suggest I don't occasionally have a little bit of quinoa. I don't really love it. But
nobody does, Cynthia. Nobody loves it. It's just something that you feel like you have to eat, and so I just don't bother.
I know my mother loves it. She's always making it because she knows that I don't really eat gluten and grains, and so she's like, technically it's a seed. I was like, yeah, but it's a really carbohydrate dense seed. I don't know if that's where I want to get my carbs from today. But the point of what I'm saying is we're looking at amino acid profiles. It is really just superior. If you look at a piece of steak versus 6 cups of quinoa to get the same amount of protein, unless you're a teenage boy, of which I have 2, and they're like impervious to anything they eat. Most people, that would be a disaster metabolically to have 6 cups of quinoa to be equivalent to like an 8-ounce piece of steak. And so I just remind people that, whether it's beans or legumes or, quinoa or hemp seeds, I'm not a fan of soy in any type, way, shape, or form. And then only if people want like fermented soy, like miso or tempeh, as an example. I think it's important for people to realize that not all plant-based protein is created equal. I see a lot of people that, as an example, want to use a non-dairy, non-whey type of protein powder, so they'll lean towards pea protein. And I just remind them it's important for us to understand like where our food is sourced from. I think that's critically important. We all have budgets. Unfortunately, now in the United States right now, beef prices are through the roof. That has dissuaded us from eating it. We're probably eating more fish now and probably more poultry just to kind of balance it out. Because again, I have teenage boys and they have ridiculous appetites.
Clear the fridge. Yeah, I bet.
It's insane. So I think it's important for people to understand that not all proteins created equal. Quality is certainly important. Source from what works best for your budget. I had the opportunity to connect with Rob Wolf. And so, he did a lot of research for his book, Sacred Cow. And when we're looking at grass-fed meat, as an example, versus traditional like feedlot grain-fed meat, the differences really are specific to like the omega-3, omega-6 content, which is one issue. But I think for me, if I decide that I'm in a restaurant and I don't know where my meat has been sourced from, I try to think about leaner cuts, because just like with humans, we trap a lot of toxins in the fat. And it's something to really think about. Like when you're eating conventionally raised meat, it's the same thing. So if they've gotten a lot of hormones, and I don't know enough about how meat is raised in the UK to be able to speculate, but I know in the United States, a lot of the feedlot animals get genetically modified feed, and they also get quite a bit of hormones and God knows what else, pesticide exposure, et cetera. So I generally say if you are going to use like a conventional feedlot beef as one example, aim for the leaner cuts. And then if you get grass-fed, you probably have more flexibility with less exposure. And so that's how nuanced we can get. I always say, first and foremost, animal-based protein is going to be superior. Second to that, go with what works best for your budget. There's no judgment. Third best, I'm not saying that you can't have plant-based protein. It's just, it's not going to be the same. Like, I don't love lentils, but I'll occasionally eat them. It's just not, it's the same thing. It's not that same satiety. Cues are not met, and therefore I end up eating more than what I want, and then it's messing up my macros. And so I think each one of us has to decide what makes the most sense for them.
Yeah, and actually as well, I think with regards to healthy fats, it's harder, I found, to get vegetable-based healthy fats in your food than it is animal fats, which are there anyway. Mm-hmm. So, I use a lot of coconut oil, for instance. I think it's a really good oil to fry with, like an egg or something. I really think it's a great oil, but it's more expensive than a seed oil. And I can't imagine too many plant-based protein foods are going to have coconut oil necessarily in them. They're more likely to have seed oils, whereas meat products have the fat in them already. Now, I'm not saying they can't also have seed oils put in, but I find that an actual piece of meat is going to have the right fat in it in the first place. Whereas, let's be honest, if it's a plant-based protein, it's going to be more processed. And so the likelihood of seed oil is a lot higher, isn't it?
It really is. And it's interesting. I presented at an event in October, and of course I came up, talking about linoleic acid as an example, like how much more you see of linoleic acid. And yes, you can get some of it in animal-based products, but in the processed seed oils, you're getting so much more that I think it's important for people just to have awareness, like if but nothing else, understanding what seed oils do. Here in the United States, soybean oil is the #1 consumed fat. #1.
Really?
which is
Wow.
disgusting. But it just shows you here in the United States,
Wow.
there's so much processed foods
Yeah.
that are littered with genetically modified, like it's predominantly corn, which is part of high fructose corn syrup, soy, sugar beets. And so I remind people, like, if you do nothing else, read food labels. Like, the one thing that really frustrates me is that other countries like the UK and the EU don't allow certain ingredients in their foods, even the processed foods.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, it's like a free for all. So I encourage
Yeah.
everyone to be really diligent about reading food labels, because that's where you're getting hidden sources of seed oils. Like, people say, well, I don't buy canola oil. I don't have sunflower, safflower. I sure as heck don't have soybean oil in my house. And I say, well, just look at the processed foods. Like, I'll give you an example. I'm sure this probably happens to you too. I get a lot of vendors who want to mail me things because they want me to, I don't know, show it up on Instagram or talk about it in a blog post. And so someone very nicely sent me a package. My kids were delighted. It was keto Pop-Tarts. And so
Okay.
I looked at the ingredient list. And of course, my husband, was looking at me skeptically. He knew it was going to happen. And I didn't want to call out the people on social media. So I just screenshotted the ingredients and I said it is sucralose, which is an artificial sweetener. It had like corn fiber, which is certainly genetically modified, a bunch of other stuff that I was like, forget it. And the ingredient list was this long.
Yeah.
And my kids in the interim came by and sampled what was there. They had, one, and then I threw the rest away. And I kept saying to my husband, the unfortunate thing is that because this says keto friendly, people then assume that it's not full of junk. So you still have to read the food labels. And I think seed oils in particular, if you can do nothing else, avoid them. Because I know when we probably eat in 95% of the time, but last Friday night, it was Valentine's Day here on yesterday. And my husband and I went out and we went to a really well-regarded steakhouse. And I kept saying to my husband, like, my continuous glucose monitor was off and I literally had just protein and vegetables. And I said, I'm confident that I got some seed oils, because I've noticed when I eat out in restaurants, that's pretty common. And if you ask most restaurants, they'll tell you, like, sometimes they'll even fry their steaks in like soybean oil, which is,
why they do that? Why they ruin a good thing? It's incredible.
I don't know. My husband suspects it might have something to do with how they can, that nice crisp, exterior you get on a steak, even if it's just like medium rare.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. So if but nothing else, read food labels. It's enlightening.
You know what, though? This is a bit worrying about the fact that keto food is becoming much more popular because, like you just said, people think, oh, keto equals clean, so I can have that. It'll be absolutely fine. And actually, you know what? There are some genuine low-carb keto brands. I like to consider my own brand one of those. But actually, as time goes on, more people will come on the market. And then, the big Kellogg's themselves will, I'm sure, bring out the keto options. There's Keto Slim Fast I've seen on the market. I mean, they're all jumping on the bandwagon, aren't they? This is the next vegan for them. That's how they see it. It's the next way to make money.
Well, and it's greenwashing. I mean, it's designed ultimately to try to detract attention from what's really going on. And so, I did like a video on Costco finds and tried to like find the cleanest things. For anyone that's not familiar, Costco is kind of like a source, like a warehouse kind of methodology. And they do have some nice things. Like, they've got grass finished meat. I mean, they're definitely cleaning things up, but the amount of stuff that said keto, and then I would look at the ingredient list and I would screenshot it, because now I love sharing information with people. I'm like, just read the food labels. Like, keto is designed to get your attention because there's this perception that keto is superior or keto is better, even if it says paleo on it. And I can't tell you how many of the products I looked at, I would probably say 75% of them had seed oils in them. And so I was like, okay, we can do better. We can definitely do better. I get asked all the time. I'm sure you do as well. What do I do when I travel? And so I actually carry beef sticks with me and like salted macadamia nuts. And that's my protein bar, because most of the bars that are out there, I mean, there are some cleaner ones. Let me be very clear. And I think there are great companies, like you're obviously doing an amazing job trying to bring, cleaner options available to people who want to have a treat. But we have to, as consumers, we really have to, look beyond the greenwashing and get really clear about what's going on. I mean, it embarrasses my kids. Like, when they were younger, they were cool about it. Now I embarrass them. And so I always tell them, I mean, this is, I think the more we know, the better choices we can make. And so I'm not suggesting you not enjoy a dessert or you not enjoy a special celebration, but like on the day-to-day stuff, it does add up. Like it really
Yeah.
will add up enormously in terms of our health. And I have people that have worked with me for the last year that all they did was remove seed oils and fast, and they've made tremendous changes to their metabolic health. And so little changes do have big impact, whether or not it's convenient to do them. I know sometimes there's a little bit of growing pain, but it's definitely something that's worthy and worthwhile.
Love that. Love that. You know what, though? I'm just thinking the reason that those products are there is because they've got a long shelf life, and so that's why they've got the rubbish in them. So our cakes last 7 days. You have to refrigerate them because they're made out of real stuff like almonds and whatnot that will, eventually will go off on eggs and things. But actually, you're right. That's why those products have a long shelf life. But I think you've probably even told me this before. If it's got a preservative to preserve its life, then it's probably going to detract from your life, and that's probably not a bad thing to think of. Whereas what you said there about the beef sticks and the nuts, they're dried out. That's why they've got a long shelf life, but they're not chemically changed in a way necessarily. Well, you can actually get bad dried beef, of course, but it's not chemically changed in a way that's going to necessarily make it last longer. It's just the fact it's dry that's going to make it last longer, isn't it?
Well, and what's funny is my husband and I, even like pre-COVID and post, well, we're not post-COVID, but during COVID, we still do a lot of travel. And the joke is the only thing that has saved me when I'm in an airport and I'm ready to like break my fast, because the airlines are no help whatsoever, is that I carry the beef jerky and the salted macadamia nuts and like a couple clean protein bars if I need something. And he laughs all the time. He's like, you've had to break into your stash X number of times. But I'm amazed at how other countries do a much better job. Like we were in Costa Rica at Christmas time, and coming back, I was amazed at the options in the airport versus some American airports where it's just crap and garbage everywhere you go. And my kids, roll their eyes and they think that it's obnoxious. But I remind people, just about anywhere you go, you can get a naked burger. You can just get a burger without a bun and wrapped in lettuce and, maybe have a salad. And that can suffice as something decent. I mean, more often than not, that's where I lean in. If I'm in an airport and there aren't a lot of options, I'm like, I'll just have a naked burger without a bun, no fries.
Yeah.
And I do just fine. But I think that, with greater awareness, we can plan and think of things that we can bring with us if we're stuck. Like my husband is far more like easygoing. He, if he gets stuck, if all else fails, he'll just eat the junk and then, suffer the consequences later. Whereas I'm just like, no way. I don't feel good when I eat it. I won't eat it.
That's great. And actually, the fact that you don't feel good is probably better for you in a way, because you have to avoid it, don't you? It's the ones who don't feel so bad, but then have it for like chronic illnesses in the future. That's the problem. But talking about that, I just want to talk just about age and gender, if I may, because these are really important areas with regards to fasting, protein levels, health generally. And I thought it'd be really good to talk about that because I didn't know this until only recently. It's a bit embarrassing to say. I didn't appreciate that we needed more protein the older we get. I kind of always assumed it was the other way around, that kids growing up need protein, and as you get older, you're fine because surely you just don't eat as much protein. But actually it's the other way around, and that kind of shocked me. And I guess it made me realize that actually it's such a naive thing to say. But I think the fact that I'm now 41 the other week, I'm now thinking, hang on a minute, I have to think about age in terms of my health. And actually, as I get older, sleep's important. But actually, the way that I'm fasting, the things I'm eating is important as well. So I thought you could talk about that, and also how men and women face these things in different ways. I appreciate you've been talking for a long time, but I think it's such an important topic. I really want to focus on those two areas.
Yeah, and they're really important. I think, I had a big birthday this past summer, and I started really reflecting on the patients I have taken care of over the last 25 years and trying to figure out like what were some of them doing really well, what were most of them not doing well because they didn't know better. And, really starting with understanding that we hit peak bone and muscle mass in our 20s and 30s. So by the time you hit 40, it's not a question of if, but when you develop sarcopenia, which is this muscle loss with aging. And so when I said muscle is the organ of longevity, AKA Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, I really mean that fervently, because the more muscle mass we maintain and build, the more insulin sensitive we will be. So really thinking about your muscle like as a glucose reservoir, and really understanding that you have to be able to eat to maintain it. So high quality protein, lifting heavy things, and it can be body weight, for some people that they hear that and they scream, and you have to sleep. And so when we're looking at like anti-aging, I really think it starts with the basis of thinking about muscle as this organ of longevity and understanding we need to do all the things we can do to maintain it, because we will lose it. It's not a question of if, but when. I can tell you that like over the last 5 years, it's been much harder to maintain muscle. I'm thin to begin with, but I was actually telling my integrative medicine doc, I was like, it's much harder to maintain muscle. And a lot of that is the hormonal fluctuation. So same thing with women. Men will go through andropause, which is when your body is not making as much testosterone. And certainly this is a scourge of the metabolic disease that we see worldwide, because we know that as men, I want to make sure not we, as men are becoming more insulin resistant, it's impacting their testosterone levels. And you can actually get aromatization of testosterone to estrogen. So you sometimes see men that look kind of feminized, and that is actually a byproduct of this aromatization of testosterone. So that's one issue, again, with metabolic health. With women, they hear this transition of, I would call it perverse puberty, but it's perimenopause, the 5 to 10 years preceding menopause, when a woman hasn't had a menstrual cycle for 12 months. And this is a time when women become sarcopenic, more insulin resistant. They may have trouble sleeping, and so that impacts their hormonal balancing, and they're getting fluctuating less progesterone, generally estrogen dominant, which can be exacerbated by the estrogen mimicking chemicals we're exposed to in our personal care products, our environment, and our food. And so it really becomes much more, I always say complicated, but it's really not when we think about, we just have to get back to basics. And so when we're looking at aging, nothing is going to age you faster than eating frequently and eating hyper palatable, highly processed foods. If you get back to eating less often and eating more nutrient dense whole foods, less things that are in a bag, a box, and a can, you are going to be able to stabilize and maintain blood sugar levels better than your conventional counterpart. Same thing with if you're sitting in front of electronics all day long and drooling and not moving your body, because we are designed as humans to move. I'm not talking about doing CrossFit. I'm just saying just general movement throughout the day. That's really important. Being sedentary in and of itself is a marker for metabolic disease. And I think that, on top of that is the food choices that we make. So if you're eating a carbohydrate dense diet, and here in the United States, there's something called My Plate, which is garbage and is really carbohydrate focused. I'm not anti-carb, but I think most of us eat the wrong types of carb. So if you're restructuring your meals, if you're eating less frequently, if you're focusing on high quality sleep, and know the concept of I'm going to sleep when I retire or when I die is really harmful. We know that there are so many benefits to getting high quality sleep. And I promise this is not just directed at you, Dan, but just everyone as individuals. And then really helping to maintain and have a healthy mindset. Like I used to think this was a little woo-woo, but we have to have a purpose, and obviously I'm in a different stage of life because I have teenagers who are going to be going off to college in a couple of years, which I cannot believe. But we get so many years with our kids before they go out on their own. And I think having a purpose beyond just being a wife or a husband or a mom or a dad, having a purpose, a connection, feeling that we're of service to others, I think that's really, really important. Having a connection to a higher spirit, whether you have a relationship with a church or synagogue or whatever, appeals to you, even just a connection with nature can be highly spiritual. So, from my perspective, the anti-aging benefits from fasting go without saying. We know based on countless amounts of research that have been done that those that eat less live longer. I'm going to say that again. Those who eat less live longer. And so I think it's really important. We've gotten into this kind of mindset and methodology that more is better. More is better. More food is better. More stuff is better. Less sleep is better. And I would remind people, if we get back to basics, like the joke of eat like, your grandparents did or live like your grandparents did is really important. We're in a hedonistic society where we can get just about anything at any time. And my kids laugh when I tell them that I'm old enough that, the TV, like at 2:00 in the morning, there was no programming in the middle of the night. And so there was no internet. There was no, just the copious amount of information you could get at any time of the day or night. And because of that, like we were forced to kind of unplug and shut off. And I think in a lot of ways our our society, our kind of methodology. It's certainly a problem here in the United States of, we have to be working all the time. We have to be super productive. And I think it's more important that we have healthy boundaries so that we're not working all the time. And one of the first cardiologists I worked with as a nurse practitioner said to me, Cynthia, I want you to go home. The work will always be here. We could be here 24/7. The work will always be here. And I embrace that even now as an entrepreneur, that I prioritize sleep for a variety of reasons, because I know that I'm not at my best when I'm grumpy and sleep deprived and, haven't had enough deep sleep. And that's certainly not beneficial. So really looking at these lifestyle choices that we're making as having a huge net impact. And I think the other kind of confounding variable is that a lot of people that make those changes, they don't see necessarily the benefits like right up front. So it can be harder to maintain them. But yet I can tell you now, looking back retrospectively at my life and a lot of the patients I took care of and still take care of, the people who do the best are the ones that are really making those lifestyle medicine choices every day, because it's very easy to think, oh, I don't worry about the smoking. I'm not going to worry about eating garbage. I'm not going to worry about not moving. Well, right now we're having a public health crisis here in the United States because there's so many metabolically unhealthy people, and we don't have socialized medicine. So this is crippling the entire healthcare paradigm on every level. And so I encourage people to really make small, subtle changes that have big impact, because you don't want to have a health scare and not make it out. Like I 3 years ago had a healthcare hiccup that I jokingly refer to. I'm almost at the 3-year mark of when I entered the hospital. And I remember the surgeon saying to me after my surgery, like, if you had been the average 40 something, you wouldn't have made it, or you would have been in rehab. So I think it's important to say this, like retrospectively and with love, that we want to be able to take good care of ourselves. And one of the ways we can do that is the types of foods we eat, when we choose to eat, how we choose to live, how we choose to move, how we choose to sleep.
Amazing. So this book, the Intermittent Fasting Transformation, what do you just repeat again, when is it going to be released, and also where can people get a copy of your book? In fact, is there a better place to get it that you will get more of the money than big organizations and stuff like that?
No. So I have a publisher. So I don't make any more or less money depending on which avenue I send you down. So March 15th is the publication date, which is really exciting. It feels like it's been a long journey, but I'm very excited about. And if you go to my website,
1 month today. Wow, there you go.
March
1 month
15th.
today.
Yeah, March 15th.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's 1 month, sorry, from today.
Yes.
Yeah, it's 15th of February. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So they really are getting close now. That's amazing.
Yes. And so, you can go to my website. We actually have a link that, depending on which country you live in, it'll take you to a local store, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, as well as your local retailers. I know it is available in the UK and the EU. I think it's highly dependent. It's very interesting to me, Canada, Australia, depending on which country people are in, they may or may not have it available to them, even though the EU obviously is a large compilation of countries. But yeah, it's been a labor of love, but one that I'm really excited to share, because there hasn't been a book yet written specific for women and our unique needs. But obviously, I say to everyone, fasting is a great option for both genders.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Cynthia, I'm really pleased for you that your book is now ready to go. And yeah, what I love is, from your TED Talk, which is fantastic. There's 2 actually TED Talks, aren't there, you've done? I recommend you check those out, everyone, on YouTube. But then I can see how you've taken the ideas you've had there, and you've got them in this book, and you've explored them much further, which is fantastic. So everyone, I hope you get a copy, and I think it'll be really useful. A really good Mothering Sunday present, because Mothering Sunday here is in March, not in May. So that would be a perfect present. It's about the 20-something of March. So it'll tie in perfectly for your mothers as a little gift for them. So Cynthia Thurlow, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your wisdom. I've learned so much as always. And I'm going to really enjoy this beef shin next, but appreciate that I need to eat a bit earlier, and I'll keep going to bed earlier, I promise.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care now. Bye.